For most people, Emma was just another housemaid, silent, discreet, always in the background. But that day, when she answered the phone in perfect French, everything in that mansion shifted, especially for Mr. Collins. He had never paid attention to the woman who dusted his shelves and polished his floors. Until that moment, what no one knew was that Emma had a secret, and her story would turn the house and the company upside down. The mansion in the city's most upscale neighborhood always looked immaculate. The garden was trimmed, marble gleamed, and an almost solemn silence reigned. Inside, everything followed a precise rhythm. Until, on an ordinary Monday morning, something unexpected happened. Emma, the new cleaning lady, was alone in the main room mopping the marble floor when the landline phone rang. The sound echoed through the quiet room. None of the usual staff were around, and for a moment she hesitated. It wasn't her job to answer calls, but the persistent ringing made her slowly approach. Carefully, she picked up the receiver. Hello? On the other end of the line, someone began to speak in French. There was urgency in the voice. The woman sounded nervous, talking about a time, a meeting, something urgent. Emma swallowed hard. Her eyes instinctively turned toward the door. No one. She took a deep breath. Bonjour, madame. Pouvez-vous répéter, s'il vous plaît? She replied naturally, without an accent, as if it was something she did every day. The conversation lasted less than a minute. In the end, Emma quickly jotted down a note on a post-it and stuck it to the base of the phone. She hung up and returned to cleaning the floor as if nothing had happened. What she didn't know was that she wasn't alone. From the top of the stairs, Alexander Reed, the owner of the mansion, had been watching in silence. He had just left his upstairs office and was coming down to retrieve a document when he heard the conversation. He stopped, startled by the language, and even more surprised to realize that the soft, confident voice belonged to the woman who had been hired just to clean hallways and bathrooms. Alexander didn't say anything. Not in that moment. But that morning, something shifted, and Emma unknowingly had sparked a flame of curiosity and respect. The next day, the mansion woke up as usual. Breakfast served at 7, meetings scheduled in Alexander Reed's private office, and the household staff divided into their tasks. But something felt different. Alexander walked into the main room and found the post-it Emma had left by the phone. The handwriting was clear, elegant, almost formal. It read, Madame Laurent called to reschedule her meeting with you. Wednesday at 10 a.m. I confirmed in French as requested. He stood in front of the small note for several long seconds. It wasn't just the clarity of the information. It was the way she had communicated, the confidence, the initiative, and especially the choice to sign simply with an E. Discreet. Precise. Alexander folded the note and placed it in his suit pocket before heading upstairs. He didn't mention it to anyone, but that small gesture had already begun to shake some of his certainties. In the afternoon, he called Rodrigo, the household manager, for a quick chat. Who's the new cleaning lady? Emma, right? Rodrigo looked surprised by the question. Yes, sir, she's been with us for just over a month. Came recommended by Mrs. Rosa. You remember the lady who worked here for years before retiring. Very proper, punctual, and quiet. Barely talks to anyone. Alexander nodded slightly and fell silent. The image of her, in a simple apron, speaking fluent and calm French on the phone, still lingered in his mind. Later, when he happened to cross paths with Emma in the hallway, she lowered her eyes as she always did. But this time, he stopped. Yesterday's note was helpful. Thank you. She looked up, surprised. I just did what felt right, sir. Alexander didn't press further. He simply nodded and walked on, but by then it was impossible to ignore. That woman was not ordinary. And that day, he added a new question to his thoughts. Who was Emma, really? That week, Alexander Reed began to notice details he would never have paid attention to before. Emma was punctual. More than that, she was as precise as the Swiss watch he wore. Every step, every movement seemed calculated. But it wasn't just discipline. There was a refinement in her gestures, the way she arranged books on the shelves, respecting alphabetical order by last name, how she handled delicate objects naturally, without hesitation. One rainy morning as he passed by the library, Alexander noticed she had reorganized the philosophy books, not in the usual order used by the staff, but in the original arrangement his wife had preferred before she passed away. Only someone who truly knew the house would know that. He said nothing. The next day, the company hosted a small cocktail party at the mansion to welcome a foreign investor. The office team was all present, busy with preparations. Alexander was mingling with the guests when, across the room, he noticed a peculiar scene. Emma was helping one of the waiters organize the wine glasses, quietly giving instructions. In Spanish, "Las copas de vino van en la fila de la derecha," she said without hesitation. The waiter nodded in gratitude. She just smiled slightly and walked away as if nothing had happened. Alexander watched everything from afar. This wasn't normal. This wasn't common. On Monday, he discreetly called Rodrigo into his office. "Is there something wrong with our employee records?" "Wrong? Not that I know of, sir. Why?" "The cleaning lady, Emma. Does her resume say she speaks French? Spanish?" Rodrigo hesitated. He opened the file on his tablet. "No, sir, nothing mentioned. Just completed high school." "No language qualifications." Alexander fell into thoughtful silence. "Make sure to keep all of this confidential. I don't want speculation." "Of course, sir." That evening, as he came downstairs to grab a book from the library, he found a discreet envelope on the table. Inside, a note. "Sorry for the interference at the cocktail party. I saw the waiter was nervous, just wanted to help. E." Once. Again, he read it over and over. She observed everything and said very little, but the little she said was more than enough to stir his thoughts. It was late afternoon when the library phone rang. Emma was picking up magazines left by weekend guests and didn't even notice Alexander had entered, a book under his arm. The phone rang again. No staff nearby. She hesitated, looked at the phone, then at the door, and finally answered. "Maison Reed, bonsoir." On the other end, a refined French voice responded naturally. It was Alexander's new business partner, confirming the details of the next morning's meeting. Emma noted everything down clearly and politely, ending with a discreet "Merci, à demain." As she hung up, the air in the room seemed heavier. Alexander was standing in the doorway, silent, his eyes locked on her. "You speak French?" he asked directly. Emma froze for a few seconds. She could lie. She could say she learned through an app, but she chose not to answer. She simply lowered her head and resumed what she was doing. "Did you understand the whole call?" he pressed. She took a deep breath. "Yes, sir. You have a meeting tomorrow at 9 with Mr. Lefebvre. He asked for the driver to pick him up at the hotel 15 minutes earlier." Alexander furrowed his brow. It made no sense. Emma wasn't just another cleaning lady, but she wasn't part of any influential circle either. She had been invisible until now. "Why didn't you ever say you spoke French?" "Because no one ever asked." And with that, she calmly walked out of the room, leaving behind a man used to having all the answers, now without any. Later that same night, Alexander opened the HR report again. No language certifications, no overseas trips, no clue. And yet, she sounded like a native speaker. Emma was a mystery, and mysteries, as he knew well, never appear by accident. The next morning, the mansion buzzed with activity. An important meeting was approaching, and preparations ranged from breakfast arrangements to document organization. But one unexpected event threw everything into chaos. Mariana, Alexander's bilingual assistant, called to say she had a high fever and couldn't come in. Alexander was, of course, irritated, but his mind quickly returned to the previous day. Emma's calm voice on the phone, her flawless fluency. Breaking all protocol, he called for the butler. "Bring Emma to the meeting room." She entered in her simple uniform, hands together, gaze steady. She didn't seem surprised, just ready. "I need you to sit here," Alexander said, pointing to the chair beside him. "Take notes of everything, French and Portuguese." Emma nodded lightly. The meeting began. Two French businessmen sat at the table, speaking quickly and fluently. Alexander understood, but struggled with details. Emma, on the other hand, followed naturally, took notes, asked questions when needed, with poise, confidence, and a discreet smile that hid her humble background. At the end of the meeting, one of the Frenchmen turned to Alexander and said admiringly, "Votre assistante est remarquable. Très rare de trouver quelqu'un aussi précis et discret." "Your assistant is remarkable. Very rare to find someone so precise and discreet." Alexander simply smiled, casting a brief glance at Emma, who was already organizing the papers. Without waiting for thanks, in the days that followed, she was called again, first to review documents in French, then to reply to emails. In no time, even without an official title, she was seen as essential. The other staff started whispering, some curious, others suspicious. How could a housekeeper achieve so much? Who was Emma, really? But she said nothing, never explained, just did what was asked. And a bit more. Always precisely. Always silently. And Alexander, who had always believed talent came from impressive resumes, began to rethink everything he knew about potential. Emma was, without a doubt, the most enigmatic employee to ever walk through that house. And they hadn't even discovered half of what she could do. The news spread through the mansion like wind on a stormy day. The French group wanted to sign the contract, but more than that, they had made a formal request that Miss Emma be the official liaison between them and the company. Alexander received the request with a mix of pride and astonishment. He knew she was competent, but he never imagined she would impress them enough to be mentioned by name in an international agreement. He called her to his office. She entered with her usual posture, unhurried, unafraid. "They want you officially on the project, and I want to offer you a position at the company, not as a favor, but because you are, without a doubt, the most qualified person for it." Emma blinked a few times. For the first time, she seemed disarmed. "A position as international relations assistant. It's the least I can offer," he said. "If you accept, the job is yours, with a fair salary, and the recognition you've always deserved." There was a silence that seemed to hold years. Then she nodded, moved. "I accept." In the days that followed, Emma began working in an office at the company's administrative building. She traded her uniform for discreet but elegant clothes. Still punctual, efficient, and reserved, the mystery around her only grew, now among the executives. At a director's lunch, someone finally asked in a casual tone, "Forgive the curiosity, Emma, but where did you learn French?" She set down her cutlery, dabbed her lips with the napkin, and answered with the same calm as always. "I was a cleaner for years at a language school. At night, after my shift ended, I would take the discarded books and study on my own. I used to listen to the classes from the hallway. No one knew, but I heard everything. The silence that followed was absolute. No one knew what to say, and perhaps they didn't need to, because in that moment everyone understood. Emma wasn't just a woman from humble beginnings who had made it. She was someone who persisted when no one was watching, who learned in silence, who grew in the shadows, and now, finally, She occupied the place that had always been hers, earned word by word, gesture by gesture, with no shortcuts. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more narratives that celebrate resilience, quiet effort, and true merit. Share it with someone who believes that talent can bloom even in the most unlikely places. And remember, what you build in silence will one day echo across the world.